You're listening to the 4-Phase Cycle podcast with your hosts, Dr. Alex and Megan of ZESTY Ginger. If you're looking to naturally balance hormones and learn how to work with your body instead of against it, you've definitely come to the right place. As a duo of an integrative MD and a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner and best friends, we use the 4 phases of the female cycle in combination with functional lab work and mindset practices to transform the lives of the women we work with.
We also have a whole lot of fun along the way. If you're new around here, it's best to start with season 1 before jumping around and plan to roll up your sleeves. Showing up for ourselves and enjoying our lives is what good health is all about. Just a quick reminder though, this information is not intended to diagnose, manage, or treat disease. Always consult with your doctor before making changes.
Hi there, this is Alex. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining me so much today. Today we're going to be talking about overthinking, and this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. And I think that I'm not alone in this, just like a bunch of the other stuff that we talk about here. And I know that Megan and I have a lot of Jim Fortin isms, but one of our favorite things that we learned from him, besides how you do one thing is how you do everything, is what's most personal is most general. And that has resonated time and time again, in that a lot of times we're like, I'm kind of out there and having a problem with this. Not a whole lot of other people have this problem. It's just me. I'm so weird, blah, 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 fill in the blank. I'm sure that have experienced this to some extent or another, and some of us have done that quite a lot, like me, where you kind of make everything like, oh, no one else deals with it. And overthinking is one of the things that we hear about very, very, very commonly. I would put it in the top 5 things that our ladies struggle with that we work with directly, like inside our Health Transformation Accelerator. So it was worth for me to dig into this topic. This, again, will be another one of these topics that will get unfolded more and more as we go in the podcast. But today, I wanted to start the conversation by talking about why overthinking is so common, why it happens, and then how to navigate it, basically what to start doing about it so that we can move forward. Because, long story short, overthinking keeps us trapped and keeps us stuck a lot of times. And more than likely, if you have been, looking at kind of what's under the hood for you and how you're living life and what your thoughts and your emotions and your physical body and your energetic body is telling you, you've likely seen this where you kind of know there's thinking about something. There's a healthy level of consideration, analysis, being thoughtful, being thorough. And then at some point, and again, that line is not so clear in a lot of instances, is overthinking, where we are basically spiraling over and over and over again in the same thoughts. And often in that scenario, we are not then coming to a conclusion that we can take action on. Right? And that's really the whole point, right? We're thinking so that we can consciously make decisions and therefore choose what we are going to do or not do, right? The absence of that sometimes is the answer. But with overthinking, what happens is that we get into a loop where the thinking becomes the predominant activity, and the use for that, right? What flows after that gets delayed because we get stuck in the loop. And this is kind of like booking your flight for a vacation. And I've used this analogy, I believe, in other podcasts, but I think it applies here as well when you think about it in this way. It's kind of like booking a vacation or planning a meal, but not really eating a meal or not really getting to the vacation, or, planning it for 2 years and then doing the thing. And so that's a lot of times what the problem is with overthinking is in the first place. And often, just like a lot of these other things that keep us stuck, we even often know that, about ourselves, whether people have pointed it out to us or we can see it for ourselves. We can see that, I'm in the shower, I'm thinking about mulling this over and over and over again. I'm waking up in the middle of the night, I'm thinking about it, I'm calling people and talking about it, I'm talking about it with my coaches, my therapist, my sister, whoever it is. That kind of thing happens. And then internally, it's the focus on whatever the issue is or whatever it is that's going on. Overthinking can happen with good or bad things, quote unquote. It could be something that's bothering us, like a problem, or even overthinking something that's positive, and now we're starting to get into that loop where we're overanalyzing it. Why this happens, I believe, is that we are, out of the four energetic bodies, physical body, mental body, emotional body, spiritual body, there is quite a bit of focus on the physical body, especially when we have had health issues come up, right? It's very obvious. I have symptoms. I need to do something to my body to get it handled. And that's accepted, and that's exactly what people believe we should do as a society. And then the mental body is often quite focused on, as well as the society, because we value taking our thoughts and putting them into words, whether that's writing, whether that's communicating, whether that's writing a book, speaking on stage, calling a friend, explaining. And because of that, we get good at it, right? Think about most of the things that you do, whether you're communicating with your kids' school, or you're talking with your partner or your friends or your family, or you're explaining yourself, you're writing emails, you're in communications with work things. Those are largely focused on thoughts in one person's head getting explained to another person's head, right? It's just, schools like this, all of that. Now, I'm going to go into why I actually love my mental body and why I had a hard time with this overthinking piece, which is where I believe, because I struggled for so long with it. I mean, this predates my health issues, right? My overthinking capabilities started way before my health issues did, and I'll let you decide on how much I think those are linked. But between the two, then, our physical body and our mental body, there's a lot of focus on it. And we've been given tools to get things out, right? For example, journaling or even cognitive behavioral therapy. Right? In the most classical sense, these things are widely accepted as ways to think through your thoughts. Pros and cons list are another example. So there's a focus on it, and we have outlets for it, and we all often utilize them. Now, that in and of itself is not a problem. It it becomes a problem when we can't quite get out of that loop, because, as I'm going to talk about coming up and what to do about it, there's often the emotions that are brought up when we have each thought, right? Because a lot of times that's the loop. There's something positive about the situation, there's something negative you can find about the situation. You're hemming and hawing. Should I do this? Should I not do this? Do I want to do this? Do I not want to do this? There's emotions that come up, and now those emotions are starting to clash. As we do the loop, the emotions loop with us. And it's not that far, it's like a hop and a skip, to the energetics of the body. We feel the turmoil of being internally at odds with ourselves, and that feeds the overthinking, because oftentimes we're like, I feel bad about this. That means I haven't thought of the right answer. And then we're like, well, if I haven't figured out the right answer, I need to think about it more. And that is essentially how we get stuck in that loop. And it's really because we're abandoning the other two pieces of information or sources of information, the emotional body and the energetic body. Then we get pushed further into overthinking. So you add that phenomenon with, a lot of us have been praised for our intellect, our ability to reason, our ability to be analytical. So we're really good at it. It's something that we have been told we're good at, therefore we oftentimes kept doing it, right? That's how we got careers where we're bosses, or employers, or we have businesses, or whatever your principal, fill in the blank, but that's essentially all rewarded, and therefore we do it more because most of us are like that, right? We like doing the things we're good at. That brings me to my point about overthinking as a thing that we value, and that's why I think it took me so long, and most likely I think that there's lots of people like me. That's why it took me so long, because I valued that ability. What's interesting, and I'll explain, is that I still value my cognitive abilities, my intellect, and my ability to think, assimilate information, and learn. That hasn't changed. However, the proportion of time that I spend there, and the responsibility, basically the weight that I place on just that part of me, that's the part that has shifted. I think this happens because there's a push and pull, right? We come from conditioning. This was me, where being smart, being good at school, accomplishing things in the world is therefore thinking is valued. So we have that. And then we get to a place in life where that strategy, and I've talked about this lots on the podcast, so I'm not going to go into this again, but that strategy, the one strategy that has been conditioned to be like that's the one. You work hard, you hustle, you hear it everywhere. We begin to apply that to more parts of our lives, and a lot of times with things like health, then that's where we get stuck, because we find that we can't think our way to good health, right? We're trying harder and harder, and getting more, food out of our diet, and more supplements in the protocol, and all of that stuff. And a lot of us are like, why isn't more working? And because of that, then we begin to hear things like, hey, getting into parasympathetic mode means calming down the central nervous system. And when we are constantly overthinking, or often overthinking, and we're in that mental loop all the time, we feel spun up, we feel at odds within. Therefore, we keep ourselves in that fight or flight mode. There's something wrong. There's something I have to figure out. Let's go. Let's do this. Where am I going wrong? And that's really the dichotomy that happens. We both value it and know for this, man, I've been doing that for a while and it's not working. And there's lots of people on the internet that are like, overthinking doesn't help. So you hear that, and so you feel bad. Well, it's my overthinking that is keeping me stuck. You know what I'm saying? But more often than not, people don't mention what to do about it. And at least in my experience, I found that it was a lot of like, well, just stop thinking, do something else. And I'm like, the problem with doing something else is that I come with me, and so does my brain. Right? And so I'm like, yeah, great. I'm into gardening, or I'll walk the dogs, but my brain is doing its thing. And of course, there's ways to work with the mental body. And I think that focusing on the mental body when you're literally addressing being less active in that area is a bit of a catch 22. And then when we can't do it, we feel bad about it. I know I did. I felt really bad about it. I was like, I'm I'm smart. Like why can't I stop? Like why can't I just sort of get myself out of this loop? This is a problem that I'm harping on. Now, of course, there's lots of brain rewiring techniques in this, but in the moment, I think that we need strategies. I think there's far too many things that people are teaching where it's like, okay, then go to meditation. Well, when you're overthinking and you're really spun up, just popping in and meditating, it's a big leap sometimes. Though sometimes we can make it, and that's great. I've done that too. And sometimes it's not available to us. And I've definitely been there. So, right, how do we systematically kind of step through and allow ourselves to work through some of this stuff so that the mental body can simmer down, the rest of the bodies that we have internally also simmer down, and then we begin to come closer to neutral, and then from neutral we can then begin to make more conscious choices about what we do with our thinking. So that's what we're headed to next in this conversation. But I do think that that is why we often feel so bad about the thinking, and why that essentially perpetuates it. Because what happened with me is that I began to overthink the overthinking, and I don't even think I need to go into it too much, but that didn't work. So, there's that. One thing that kicks off the what to do about it is addressing that point right there. So essentially, for me, number one, I had to realize that I valued my capacity to think and analyze, make decisions, be creative, and communicate. At first, it was just saying, this is a really strong part of me. This is something that I'm actually very proud of. It's gotten me to a lot of places in life. And more than likely, you can say the same thing, right? No matter what you've done, your brain helped get you there. Your thinking mind helped get you there, no matter what it is that you're doing, parenting or being a firefighter, programmer, whatever you do, it doesn't matter. The intellect got you there, and it doesn't even if you're like, oh, I don't think I'm that smart, your thinking mind still got you. You are participating in life, right? So when we're dealing with overthinking, at least first step number one is acknowledging what it does do for us. And when I started thinking about that, all of a sudden it was a lot easier to see that I wasn't trying to not think. I was trying to have a healthier relationship with my mental body and the way that I choose to think habitually in my life. See how that's very different than saying, oh, I just need to stop overthinking. It's like, what does that even mean? Where's the line? Right? And so when we say, here's our mind, here's what it does for us, I want to change how I interact with it. And even at some point, I had the thought, now I didn't stay here, but I really was like, honestly, this is just the razor's edge of every really strong good thing about us often comes with a little bit of the flip, right? If you're really outgoing, sometimes there's situations where we're like, I was a little loud, right? Or I shouldn't have done that. Or if we're I can't even think of examples, but you know what I mean? Like the good things about us sometimes have small downsides, and the things that we perceive are bad things about us have small upsides. And small and whatever is, it's all relative, and so is good or bad. But for your, however you conceptualize it for you, there are downsides and upsides to both of them. And once I thought, I really value this, and because I value it so much, I can even appreciate that it has some limitations to it, but it's only because that's a strength to some extent, right? And so once I got that, that let me off the hook. I wasn't making myself as wrong anymore in that regard. Then, when I got into overthinking, so step two, is that I began to see it as, this is my brain doing what it's really good at. Okay, so then step number two is, how do I facilitate allowing it to express itself safely in this moment? Right? Because the deal with overthinking is that more often than not, we are in a loop. We're thinking the same things over and over again. It's kind of like when you have a to-do list and you haven't written it down and you're trying to keep it in your mind, so you just keep going through it over and over. And then once you write it down, doesn't turn out to be that many things to do. Or even if it's a lot to do, it's still finite at some point. And the same thing is here. Sometimes with the overthinking, especially once we've caught on to this, we're actually trying to quelch it. So instead of saying, oh, I'm not going to think about it, but really you just want to think about it and you really are, this is where the acknowledgement of this good thing about me, this powerful thing about me, is on my side and it's doing its thing. How can I give it a voice? And a voice in a safe space. This is different than calling all your girlfriends. I've totally been there. Calling all your girlfriends and venting about it, or not even venting, but discussing it ad nauseum, reading. I mean, some people go down the reading horoscopes or predictions for astrology, or using human design to do it, using religion to do, like there's a million ways to get at it, but that can often happen. And so with the vocalization of what's going on, a lot of times I have found it incredibly helpful to get it out on paper. If you have done that already, there's a couple different avenues. Sometimes for me, writing things out repeatedly has helped. And sometimes I notice that I'm starting to write the same stuff over and over, and it just feels like I'm getting more into it. At that point, that's where step number 2 is complete. And that's when I remind myself, hey, and this lovingly, right? I have vocalized all of this. It's in my journal. I can go read it. And you even can go do that. Just be like, hey, it's the same thoughts. Let's verify this. This is not adding more to the equation. Once that happens, though, what we're really dealing with is all the aftershock. And this is what I was talking about with the emotions that get stirred up. Because what really happens with overthinking, right? There's some foundational fears that we all have. For example, if you're dealing with working on co-creating something and you want something to happen and you're overthinking it and wondering about it, at the root often it's fear about will it happen? And that can take on lots of different flavors, whether it's am I good enough for it to happen? Is the universe supporting me? Right? It gets to the heart of a lot of our more deeper fears: worthiness, belonging, support, who we really are, right? And the emotions around there are often fear-based emotions. There can be a variety of them, but really at the root cause, the emotions then become the reason that we say, I feel bad, let me try to figure it out. Whereas if we have emotions, we can address emotions differently than we address thoughts. The issue with this, and I'll be talking about this a whole lot more. For example, there's a podcast episode, Standing in the Eye of the Hurricane, that helps. That's an emotional process that I was sharing previously. We can start to do processes about it. The problem is that it's hard to share emotions in the same way because they are experienced and sat with. The emotions can also have a voice. Sometimes I have written out the actual fears, like when I feel the fear, it's more easy for me to translate them into what is it that I'm really fearful about. For example, maybe the universe won't support me and I won't end up getting to do that, or I won't get healthy, or I won't have that relationship, or I won't get that job. That becomes a different way. And then sometimes the emotion itself is what is very uncomfortable and can be sat with. So processes like the hurricane one, where you are physically getting more into your power and getting space, allows us to begin to process that kind of thing. One of the other things that I like to do is tracking the emotions in the body. So A lot of times it's a fear. People will say that they feel constricted in the middle of their chest or pit at the bottom of their stomach, right? This is common. When we shove emotions down and we're not addressing them, they often stay in that same location. Therefore, we say, when I feel anxiety, it's this pit in my stomach or it's this knot in my chest. We see them as static. What happens though when we actually start addressing emotions is that they move, they morph, they shift. And the good part about that is that they work themselves out. But the only way through is going in, right? You have to actually feel them to allow them to move enough to get out of the body and work. Basically, they were there for a reason. They were letting you know, hey, this thing's important to me, right? I have this fear. This fear needs to be addressed. That's what they're there for. Once we begin to honor them and sit with them, and tracking emotions in the body is really just, as it sounds, I mean, easy in terms of what you do. You just sit there and notice where the emotion travels over time and letting yourself feel it. And one of the other processes that I've shared on the podcast is the seeing yourself as the child version of you who first felt that emotion very strongly, so that you can externalize. When we envision a child, we're a lot nicer to them than how we are in our own heads, right? Oh, you're so stupid. Why do you feel this way? You've worked on this before, blah, 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 right? Fill in the blank. Whereas when you're envisioning a child version of you experiencing this emotion, most of us are not screaming at children, right? And so that kind of thing allows us to sit, watch it move, and prove to ourselves over time that emotions are not static. They will move as soon as we acknowledge what it is that they are trying to show us. And that may not happen right away. But what's interesting is that as we start to ask those better questions of, what is this telling me about this situation that I'm overthinking? Then all of a sudden the emotion moves because it's not needed in the same way again. Now, that's not to say tomorrow or whatever it can't surface again, but when we have processes to work through these kind of things and we begin to show ourselves that we will do it. We're not looking to escape. We're not looking for someone else to handle our emotions. We're not looking at our partner to comfort us with. They're all, getting comfort from friends and family and all of that is great, but it's to augment the experience, not to shove down the emotions and use comfort from someone else as a way to take away from our own autonomy and our own authority, and the fact that we are our own adults for our own inner children. So now that is moving into the next step, right? Actually acknowledging the emotion and allowing it to process interrupts the cycle of overthinking, because now the emotions are not looping back and feeding it further. The same is true for the energetic body. I've talked about the white light shower, right? Seeing unconditional love coming down from however the sky, however you envision a higher power or whatever word you use for it, right? Unconditional love is common in all of the ways that people discuss a higher power in this universe, and allowing that to, you know, address the sensations. So I'm uncomfortable. Where am I feeling it? Maybe I've crawling on my legs. Maybe it's just this discomfort that you're like, it's not an emotion I can name. It's just how I feel inside my energetic space. And if you've never actually thought about that, it's okay. Know that it takes time. You're literally becoming, if no one had ever, like, if we didn't have to eat all the time and no one ever taught you, like, here's what hunger pains feel like, and when you feel that, it's time to eat, right? Like as kids, we are shown that because people are like, "Hey, you're having a meltdown. Are you hungry?" And you're kind of like, "Oh yeah, that's the sensation." And over time, you learn. And so it's the same with the energetic body. If you haven't done it, it's going to take a little bit of that practice. So if that's where you are, cool. And if you have been sitting with that, this is where I really feel the sensation in my body and then use the white light. It's just like taking a shower. Through, and around you, and anything that's hanging out. The invitation and the intention is to allow it to bring up whatever we need to know about it. Right? What is it telling us? What information can we glean? And then out through our feet and into the earth. And what's cool about energy is that this is kind of like the sciencey stuff you learn in middle school, but it's not created or destroyed, right? For matter, the things that we perceive as negative energetics that get trapped inside our space can be recycled and used by someone else, right? There's a purpose to it. And it's a lot like nature where things die off decay and then out of them grow new things. And so that's actually a really cool thing, right? You're not like, negative, this is bad. I need to cast it out. I need to vilify it. No, it's just energy. It's there to tell you something as we ask good questions like, okay, I feel you. I'm here with you. What is this about? What's going on? We use that, then we can release it. Now, as we do these steps, oftentimes the brain, because it's gotten really good at being prioritized and thinking, it's a habit, it's going to chime in. Be like, this emotion, like I said, I already worked through this. Oh, this energetic, does energy even exist? Right? It's gonna say things. That's okay. This is all just where we're placing our focus. It's not, again, if we're valuing our intellect, there may be things that in all the chatter we're like, oh, that's the one, right? It can have nuggets. So we're not really trying to suppress every single thought. However, the emphasis and the proportion of time that we spend actually addressing and supporting each part of ourselves, that's the part that changes. So please know that even as you're sitting with emotions, the brain is going to do its mind chatter thing, or I should say, not brain, mind. It's going to do its thing. It's going to be doing what we told it to do, right? That's how it works. And therefore, it's a learning process. Don't worry about it in the beginning. It's still going to feel like there's a lot of thinking. But once we start thinking, like, what is this emotion teaching us and that kind of stuff, it really changes the focus. And when we change our focus, we change our perspective, right? And when we change our perspective, we can get different insights that we then get to act on. Now this whole process is interrupting the overthinking loop. When we don't feel as emotionally charged about it and the discomfort levels of what should I do? Is this right? What's the right decision? Blah, blah, blah. That calms the whole thing down. That means that as we get new pieces of information, we can see it from that higher perspective. And with these new insights, now we get to bring the new information into that fold, and we can more powerfully decide how we choose to move forward. It's all about your choice, right? And there can be overthinking about what is so and so going to think, and what is my mother going to say, and what does my partner think about this? I've already asked for blah, blah, blah. That's true, but what we're talking about here is standing in your own power and authority. And yes, of course, we consider everyone else, but first and foremost, and we have clarity about who we are, what we want, what feels good, right? All of the things that we glean from thinking about, feeling about it, energetically being aware about what information we're getting. And even physical body stuff, right? There's symptoms that come up, not even symptoms like dialoguing with our body. When that kind of stuff happens, then the conversations that we have with people also become from a higher perspective and therefore a lot more smooth. They become a lot more smooth, right? And what's cool about that is as we talk to people, it's not like, well, Sally said this, I swung in that direction. My mom said this, I swung in that direction. And off we go in the overthinking thing again. It all kind of feeds into it. So when we do this work and we are it's not even work, right? It's just simply saying, I'm addressing all parts of me. It would be like being like, I have to work on food as work, right? Food is food. We can make it mean whatever we want. And so the process of allowing the overthinking to slow down, and quite honestly, what happens is that when we address all parts of ourselves, that begins to make us stronger. It makes us more powerful. It makes us more clear. It makes us more intentional. It makes us less at the mercy of all the external factors out there in the world. And isn't that really what we're going for, right? That's why we're thinking so much. We're trying to do the right thing, whatever that is for us, whatever we've deemed that to be. Overthinking and addressing that is not a different goal. It's actually getting us there faster. So while this can seem new and maybe even, especially with energetic body, a little bit out there, but if you've never done this and, overthinking and the mental body is predominantly where you're living these days, and totally fine if you are, like I said, did it for my whole life for until, fairly recently. Just try it out if it calls to you, right? And if you're not there yet, don't worry about it. This is one of those things that I think if I had heard 5 years ago, I wouldn't even be available for this. So if you're like, that makes no sense, cool, do your thing, it's all good. And then you just know that, there could be other options. And me, as my own authority, gets to decide that. If I want to circle back around to it, cool. If I don't want to, cool. This is like all other podcast episodes. I feel like I say this every third podcast episode. None of this is, I think you should, fill in the blank. This is simply food for thought from a different perspective when we are in a place where we feel stuck, right? These are options. And when Megan and I talk about toolkits, that's really what it comes down to. The bigger the toolkit, the greater the empowerment, because all of a sudden we're like, I got options. You throw something else at me, life throws something else at me, something happens, I got things for it. I got a lot of things for it. And that's really where the power begins to really, really build, because we're proving to ourselves a whole lot of stuff. And when we begin to see how important and insightful and resourceful and powerful we are, you know, things change. I don't even have to make an argument for that. All right, so I would love, love, love to hear your thoughts on this as you listen, and of course, as you apply it in your own life. When you're overthinking, don't forget, you've if you've been an overthinker, it's going to take a little while to change what's happening and to build mastery in this new way of approaching yourself. So this is very, very important that you view yourself in this process as, hey, I'm doing something new. And just like if you've never golfed before and someone's like, here, let's play golf, you probably wouldn't be like, well, I should be Tiger Woods or whatever. I don't know golf, but I hear there's some issues there. The You would just wouldn't have that expectation. But because we don't talk about all this stuff, we're like, oh yeah, it's emotions. I've had emotions for a while, like I should be good at it, right? But how many processes have you been taught with that over your life? And if you have some, amazing, and if you found them for yourselves, great. But there's more. There's lots of ways to do this, just the same way we found with overthinking or thinking in general. Alrighty, so That is it. Can't wait to hear from you. I will catch you on the next podcast episode.
Thanks for coming out to hang with us on the podcast. It is our goal to transform the way women are treated in healthcare. And we need your help. We need your help to get the word out. We have a lofty goal of 1 million downloads. And we know that as this podcast grows, we're going to be able to reach more women, get more amazing speakers for you, and bring the most cutting edge information.
If you found these podclasses helpful, please take a moment to text 5 women you know the link to the series. We appreciate your help so much. Can't wait to see you next time.